So before I get into these box office numbers, I wanted to talk about for a moment how I recently rewatched The Winter Soldier, and I actually forgot how involved in that movie Sam Wilson was. Even more so, I was shocked to discover that not only does that movie hold up quite good, but also Falcon is a pretty awesome character in it. Let's just say he holds his own, and I would have loved to have seen Marvel build up that character in a much more organic way. Unfortunately, they decided to take the easy way out and leech off the Captain America name instead. Basically removing any unique identity that Sam Wilson had and relegating him to a replacement character. And yes, I know it happened in the comics, but it wasn't very well received there either. Bottom line, just because it's in the comics does not mean that it's a good idea. Let's discuss.
Our content sucks. Our content sucks.
I watch so you don't have to.
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Now, I know this is not going to come as a shock to most of you, but it's starting to feel like the media is once again lying to you in a desperate attempt to cover for yet another Disney Marvel project.
No way.
Yes way.
Well, maybe lying is a strong word, but it does feel like they are misrepresenting the numbers just a little bit. And to be clear, this is not the first time that it's happened with a MCU movie. But every time it does happen, it always makes me ask the question, what exactly makes these MCU movies so special? Why are other movies not given the benefit of the doubt by the media to this level? Why do other movies not receive the same level of excuses and misdirection that Marvel movies do? As far as the numbers that I'm about to react to, I have to give one Grace Randolph credit for putting these numbers together. Listen, I know I'm just as surprised as you are, and Grace's movie reviews do leave a lot to be desired, but when it comes to movie math, I think she gives a pretty decent perspective. So Disney is reporting that Captain America Brave New World had a 4-day domestic opening of $100 million. They are also reporting a $192.4 million opening worldwide. And this news has a lot of people on the internet feeling validated right now. But if we stop and think for a moment and actually look at the numbers, I'm not entirely sure that it is the success story that they think it is. I mean, as soon as I heard these numbers, I felt like Biff in Back to the Future 2.
Something very familiar about all this.
First of all, I always find it interesting how movie studios and the media tend to report on these numbers in a way that supports the narrative. For example, we've seen situations in the past where headlines will lead with the worldwide box office numbers if domestic numbers are low. And in Brave New World's case, Disney very strategically and intelligently, I might add, decided to release this movie over President's Day weekend, knowing that they could then report the 4-day holiday totals instead of the regular weekend totals that we usually hear. And no, they are not the first studio to do this, but if you do take it into consideration, Brave New World actually had what was closer to a $88.5 million opening weekend. Now that obviously sounds significantly less impressive than a $100 million weekend, but to be fair, it's still nothing to shake your head at. Now, if you believe the reports that are going around that this film only had a $180 million budget, then this would seem like a reason to celebrate.
Bullshit.
But hold on just a second, because the reality of the situation is this movie needs about $425 million overall just to break even, according to new reports. Now, I know some of you might be saying, well, it's already at $192 million. It needs to get to $425 million, so that should be pretty easy. But it's not as easy as it sounds. A lot of people are forgetting about the dreaded second week drop-off, which has plagued a lot of big-budget blockbusters in the past, including Marvel movies. If we can for a second, let's look at the numbers for a movie like Quantumania, a film that was considered a flop. Quantumania started its run with a $240 million worldwide opening weekend, bigger than Brave New World, and it still only finished with $463 million overall. Just over what Brave New World needs just to break even. So long story short, I think it would be wise to not celebrate just yet, until we see those second week numbers. The fact of the matter is, this movie will need to hold strong for several weeks if it's going to turn a profit. And based on the MCU's recent track record, that doesn't seem like an easy possibility. The reality of the situation is, I know some people like to push back on the idea of superhero fatigue, but when more than a few of these movies have great opening weekends and then completely fall off a cliff in the second weekend, do you know what that tells me? That tells me that these movies are not reaching or connecting with as large of an audience as they used to. Meaning, yes, the diehards are still showing up in week one to support these films as they desperately hold on to the idea that this franchise hasn't missed a beat. But we know better, don't we? Because the normies, the general public, are quickly growing tired of the same old and it really doesn't help when you are trying to sell them a movie that features a replacement version of a character that they used to love, featuring a lead that does not have the star power that past leads in the MCU had. It also didn't help that the movie is painfully mediocre, and the marketing did absolutely nothing to convince people otherwise. Here's what I've noticed about this movie over the past couple days that has red flags going up everywhere. First of all, I saw very little legitimate buzz for this movie prior to its release. And now that it's out, we have a situation where the critics aren't exactly giving it glowing reviews. But of course, there are people online who are trying to convince everyone that the critics are wrong and cannot be trusted. Ironically, the same people who used to wear MCU Rotten Tomatoes scores like a badge of honor when those scores validated their opinion.
My, how the tables have turned.
Some people are suggesting that we pay more attention to the Rotten Tomatoes audience score because that number is a little more in line with their way of thinking. Well, I think it's time to consider the real possibility that even the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes can no longer be trusted. I think we need to consider the real possibility that there just may be some review boosting going on with this movie and others. I mean, when the audience scores are super low and do not match the critic scores, they blame review bombing. So isn't it entirely possible that that works in both directions? We just don't hear a lot of talk about review boosting because it doesn't fit the toxic fan narrative.
Man, I'm tired of being right.
A lot of people were up in arms about the B- cinema score for Brave New World. Now, a B- is the lowest cinema score for an MCU movie ever. Now, do I personally believe that this film deserves that low of a score? No, not really. As I said in my review, yes, I do believe it is the worst Captain America movie in the MCU. But to me, it is certainly not the worst MCU movie. But you also cannot deny that a B- cinema score is a clear-cut sign that these movies are starting to fall out of favor with the general public. Now, in this situation, you can either stick your head in the sand and still pretend that everything is alright, or you can ask yourself, what can Marvel Studios do better? What can Marvel Studios do to improve this situation? Now, I know it's against certain people's nature to look at things critically in this day and age because they are afraid of being perceived as being toxic. But criticism, believe it or not, is a good thing. Oftentimes, it's even healthy because it gives Marvel an idea of where they can improve.
Put some effort into it!
Pretending that everything is alright and trying to dismiss the people who are being critical as toxic racist trolls isn't helping anyone. It's not helping Anthony Mackie, who could have honestly benefited from some better material. It's not benefiting general audiences who honestly deserve a higher quality of content to spend their money on. Listen, it's hard being critical. Nobody understands that more than I do. It's gotten so bad that I actually had people this week telling me that I went into this movie wanting to hate it, while simultaneously giving the film criticisms that matched my own. They just refuse to admit that sometimes highly critical people like myself aren't being toxic and that we're actually right. At the end of the day, Brave New World has its flaws, whether people want to admit it or not. This movie did nothing to change the perception of Anthony Mackie in the role of Captain America, and it did nothing to change the perception of the MCU moving forward. And all the blame for that should be squarely on the shoulders of Disney and Marvel Studios. Don't blame the critics, most of whom have finally woken up from their MCU brainwashing that affected their judgment for years.
Y'all be cool. Ano?